about that?
It's quite ironic, isn't it? I mean, my parents were brought up on carrion films.
They were fun.
It's certainly a very puzzling case, Doctor.
It's an enigma. That's what it is, Maidson. An enigma. I am not having another one of those.
They were a little bit naughty.
But darling, I think I'd like a roll.
Great. Let's go upstairs.
I mean a sausage roll.
Oh,
But at the same time, they provided a picture of Britain. And that picture in Carry On Sergeant's barely recognisable from that shown in Carry On Emmanuel 20 years later.
which was nice.
Derided by critics during their 20-year span, it's only relatively recently that social commentators have come to appreciate them. Andy Medhurst features the Carry On films as he lectures on media, film and cultural studies at Sussex University. For him, they capture the way that people living humdrum lives with limited horizons found a release in comedy.
They weren't trying to be propagandistic in any kind of way. They weren't trying to say this is how life should be. Over that period of time.
The Carry On team, Kenneth Williams, Charles Hawtrey, Hattie Jakes, Kenneth Connor, Sid James, Joan Sims, and of course Barbara Windsor, are forever associated with seaside postcard humour.
How about those two things sticking out in front?
Yeah, how about them?
Oh, saucy.
Over time, the films got bawdier, the double entendres riskier. But back in 1958, when Carry On Sergeant came out, Britain was still in a period of relative austerity and regimentation. Until its abolition 2 years later, national service was the norm for most young men, dragging them away from family and loved ones.
Congratulations. May all your troubles be little ones, and remember the first 10 years are the worst. In accordance with warning notice already sent you, you are required to report to amateur national service depot. Charlie, it's your call-up.
Using the plotline of Charlie Sage, played by Bob Monkhouse, whose wedding night plans are thwarted by his national service call-up, the Carry-Ons were born. The wartime experience of different classes thrown together provided right material for producer Peter Rogers and director Gerald Thomas, the team behind the whole series. The leading film historian Sir Christopher Frayling was 12 when Carry On Sergeant came out in 1958.
There is a historic moment in it where Kenneth Connor is on the train with Bob Monkhouse, and you get the first suggested joke in the history of Carry On, where Connor plays a hypochondriac, and Monkhouse said, "How did you pass the medical?" And Connor says,
Only doctors. I'll tell you, mate. 2 of everything you should have 2 of, and you're in.
and I remember giggling, thinking, that's the sort of thing you say behind your hand at school. I was at boarding school. Needless to say, that was the sort of snigger kind of joke. So it was on the edge of risque. I've subsequently discovered that Carry On Sergeant got into trouble with the censor. The censor's report has now been published. It's quite interesting what they were worried about. The beginning of the report says, this is a good-hearted scene, so we're not going to be so tough on it as we might have been. But 2 lines worried me. One was, in reference to bureaucracy, someone says, you're all a load of chits. And the other was, someone says, man cannot live by sausage rolls alone. Which you think, is that worrying? It's because it was a reference to the Bible. Man cannot live by bread alone. And the censor wrote and said, I really think that's too close for comfort if you're actually going to quote a line which depends on its humour on recognising food. Interesting. I mean, that's 1958.
Of course, for many of the cast, their normal lives had been interrupted by national service. Kenneth Williams later recalled how he, like so many of his contemporaries, had tried that old trick of feigning sickness.
The best I got it, and he said, yes, all right, this boy obviously needs sedation. This is a question of so he probably needs stroke, minor heat stroke, is having. I was put him to sick bay and put in bed. I know thermometer, put him in the mouth, temperature taken, special diet. And goodness knows what. Others that were in there eventually I found out were doing just as much malingering as I was. But I found on for a very good thing here.
But up on screen, Hattie Jakes, playing Medical Officer Captain Clark, was more than a match for any malingering soldier.
Not today. You're all right. But, Doctor, I can feel a definite thump. Regularly, a boom, boom, boom. boom, boom, boom. That's it. Strong. That's your heart beating. Normal.
Cleared for duty, the national serviceman's lot comprised endless drilling and discipline, excepting, of course, Private Golightly, played by the inimitable Charles Hawtrey.
Now you lads are in uniform for the first time. But I think you'll all agree with me that you don't yet look like soldiers. It would be stupid of me to expect that.
Keep put that. Keep there now.
That man there! Private Golightly, someone should have told you. You're not to talk when you're on parade. Stop the action. You don't do it. Understand?
Oh, yes, I understand.
Right. Now, where was I? What was I saying?
How stupid you are.
One bit of march past was da 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 bum bum, that one. And at the end I really enjoyed the marching because there was rhythm, there was music, and we weren't allowed to sing. We sang outrageous versions of songs, you know, it was instead of Long Way to Tipperary, it was a long way to Tipperary, which I thought was terribly dull.
Scriptwriter Norman Hoodis scoffs at any notion that he was trying to make a sociological point. He was merely drawing on his own wartime experience in the RAF to pull together a plot line which would become familiar in the early carry-ons. A ragbag of people thrown together, but coming out on top in the end.
For the most part, it was earnest people in circumstances where they were being tried and pushed to the limit, almost giving in, but eventually and surprisingly, if possible, coming through and doing what they're supposed to do and doing it well, then modestly walking away from it. And this happened, exemplified in Sergeant. That's what it was about, coming through in the end, which is the story of Britain, particularly of recent memory of World War II.
The journalist and writer Simon Heffer has no doubt what the early carry-on films managed to achieve.
There's a great sense in the carry-on films, but certainly I think for the first 10 years of their existence, that it's about people who are all in it together. There's that sense of social cohesion which was very important before an age when individualism became as highly prized as it is now. And I think that was the predominant, if you like, sociological current. And the films very accurately, I think, reflect that.
Box office success for Carry On Sergeant meant a follow-up was quickly requested. Once again, community spirit, a bunch of misfits thrown together, and a national institution, this time the NHS, provided the basic narrative shape for the second Carry On movie, Nurse, based on a men's surgical ward. And writing the screenplay, Norman Hoodis again drew on personal experience.
Nature took a hand and threw me into the Watford Peace Memorial Hospital with an exploding appendix. So I had 10 days free research into what it's really like, which is horny men and lovely girls all in a room together, the one helpless against the other.
Let me warn you, hospitals have a strange effect on